The movie begins with this guy named Matthew. He's this young dude who just moved to a new place. One fine morning, his mom, Christine, takes him to his new school. That's when he meets a guy named Nick. So, after school, when Matthew's busy packing his stuff in his room, his stepdad Jacob pops in. Jacob spots this poster of a boxer on Matthew's wall and asks him about it. Matthew explains that the boxer in the poster is his grandpa back in the day when he used to be in the boxing ring. But now, his grandpa's switched to being a referee. Now the next day at school, Matthew bumps into Nick again, and this time, there's this girl called Ruby with them. Nick and Ruby invite Matthew to join their group, asserting that they are the most popular students in school. However, there's a condition attached. Nick wants Matthew to engage in a conversation with a cheerleader named Teresa. So, even though it's a bit awkward, Matthew gathers up his courage and says hi to Teresa. But Teresa's got a boyfriend named Hector, and he shows up all mad and shoves poor Matthew to the ground. One night, while Matthew was reading a book in his room, Jacob, his stepdad, came in and gave him a book all about the legendary boxer, Muhammad Ali. Matthew was super happy about it and decided to take the book to school with him. But then things took a bit of a rough turn. Hector and his buddies, they stopped Matthew and spilled some drinks on his precious Muhammad Ali book. Hector was all set to pick on Matthew, then a janitor named Barnes stepped in to save the day. He stopped Hector and his friends from causing any more trouble. After they left, Barnes noticed Matthew's book about Muhammad Ali and had an idea. He told Matthew to check out the boxing classes at school. So Matthew did just that. He was checking out the schedule for the boxing classes when, you won't believe it, but Hector and his gang showed up again. They wanted to mess with Matthew because Barnes had stopped them before. But this time, Matthew had backup. Nick, his friend from earlier, came to help him out. And things got pretty intense because it turned into a full-on fight between Nick and Matthew against Hector and his friends. When Matthew got back home, he really wanted to sign up for those boxing classes at school. So he asked his mom, Christine, if she could give her consent by signing a letter. But Christine said no. She was worried because Matthew had never done any martial arts stuff before and didn't want him to get hurt. But Matthew wasn't about to give up. Nope, he went ahead and pretended to sign his mom's name on the consent letter so he could join the boxing classes. The very next day, Matthew shows up for his first boxing class at the school gym. The coach is this ex-pro boxer named Harward. Harward tells all the students that there's gonna be a big boxing match between schools, and each school has to send 2 students to represent them. He already picked 2 students, Joe and Hector. Now Matthew knows that Hector is also in the boxing classes, and he starts feeling all hopeless. He's thinking of quitting boxing altogether. But then Barnes, the janitor from earlier, comes to talk to him and convinces him to stand up to Hector and not give up so easily. Harward called Matthew and Hector into the ring for their first practice match. Remember, Hector was the guy who had tried to bully Matthew before, so he was eager to show off and beat him in the ring. When Harward blew the whistle to stop the fight, instead of stopping, Matthew took a swing at Hector, and they ended up in a real fight. It got pretty messy, and because they broke the rules, Matthew got kicked out of the boxing class. After everyone had left for the day, Barnes, the janitor who had been helping Matthew, came over to lift his spirits. Barnes shared his own story with Matthew. Turns out, Barnes used to be a famous pro boxer back in the day. But his success got to his head, and he became arrogant, always underestimating others. He even showed Matthew the championship trophy he had won. This story really motivated Matthew. He wanted to become a boxer too, and seeing how sincere he was, Barnes decided to help him out. He taught Matthew some boxing techniques, and even lent him his own boxing gloves. Now Matthew was on his way to becoming a boxer, just like he'd always wanted. After getting kicked out of boxing class, Matthew didn't give up. He started doing his physical training after school. During one of these sessions, he told Barnes that his grandpa had also been a pro boxer back in the day. Turns out Barnes actually knew about Matthew's grandpa since they were fellow boxers. Matthew really wanted Barnes to keep training him so he could become a great boxer like his grandpa. Barnes agreed, but he had one condition. Matthew had to keep up with his schoolwork and make sure his grades stayed good. Matthew agreed to that deal. So Matthew started his training with Barnes. He had to do daily workouts and practice different punching techniques with Barnes. Then, one day, Hector came up to Matthew and told him that Harvard was giving him another chance to join the boxing class. At first, Matthew wasn't sure because he'd been training with Barnes, but Hector kept convincing him, and eventually, Matthew decided to give it a shot and come back to the boxing class after school. Matthew showed up for the boxing class, but he didn't see Harvard anywhere. All he saw was Hector and his buddies hanging around. Joe, another student, told Matthew that Harvard would be there soon and suggested he step into the ring and face off against Hector. It turns out that Hector had planned this all along. He just wanted to beat Matthew in the ring and make him look bad. Just when things were getting rough, Barnes showed up and tried to help Matthew. He was about to go head-to-head with Hector, but then Harvard showed up out of nowhere and told everyone to leave. After the incident, Harvard, who didn't like Barnes interfering in his class, went up to him and asked him to stay out of his business. Harvard had a soft spot for Hector, who was the best student in his boxing class, and he made fun of Matthew, calling him a weak geek. This made Barnes pretty mad, and he asked Harvard to give Matthew and Hector a fair chance to fight one more time. Harvard, being all confident that Hector would win easily, agreed to the challenge. Barnes found Matthew in the library and told him that he should fight Hector again in a boxing tournament. Matthew was pretty surprised because he didn't want anything to do with Hector, who was always looking for ways to bully him. But Barnes wouldn't give up. He started sharing some motivational quotes that had helped him when he was down in the dumps. After hearing Barnes' advice, Matthew got all fired up and decided he wanted to get back on his feet, defeat Hector, and most importantly, conquer his fears. So, Matthew started practicing boxing with even more passion and energy in the following days. Barnes said they'd train at a boxing gym owned by his friends. But before they could do that, Barnes told Matthew to get permission from his parents by having them sign a consent letter for the boxing championship. Since his mom never allowed him to take boxing classes, Matthew once again faked her signature. After training at the boxing gym for a while, Matthew got even more excited, especially because he managed to beat one of the best students in a practice match. Things were starting to look up for him. The next day, Matthew couldn't find Barnes, so he decided to train on his own. But after school, a surprise awaited him. The principal came to his house and told Matthew's parents that he had faked their signatures to join the boxing championship. This made his mom, Christine, really angry because she had never wanted him to do boxing in the first place. The principal also said he had fired Barnes for supposedly getting Matthew into the championship without his parents' permission. Matthew tried to explain that it was his own idea to fake the signatures and that Barnes didn't know anything about it. He really wanted to be a great boxer. When Matthew found out why Barnes had left, he felt bad and wanted to apologize. He asked around and eventually found Barnes on a ship. He told Barnes how sorry he was for everything. After hearing Matthew's side of the story, Barnes forgave him and encouraged him to keep going, especially in the match against Hector. But Matthew said he would only do it if Barnes was there with him. Barnes told Matthew not to rely on others and to face his fears head-on because only he could overcome them. Even though Barnes wouldn't be there with him later, Matthew felt confident again and was determined to win the championship. The big day of the match arrived, and everyone was super pumped for the showdown between Matthew and Hector. After Matthew convinced his parents, Christine and Jacob, that this boxing match meant a lot to him, they decided to come and root for their son. Nick and Ruby also showed up to cheer Matthew on. As Matthew was getting ready in the locker room, Barnes came by. He was going to watch the fight from the stands and gave Matthew another pep talk to boost his spirits. Unexpectedly, Matthew's grandpa showed up to support his beloved grandson. The fight started, and in the first round, Hector unleashed a bunch of punches on Matthew, but Matthew managed to hang in there. During a break, Matthew's grandpa came over and encouraged him to go on the attack. But in the second round, Hector didn't give Matthew a chance to strike back and kept hitting him. That's when Principal Lee asked Barnes to stand by Matthew's side in the ring. Without hesitation, Barnes came over and pumped up Matthew with a bunch of motivational words to boost his confidence. After Barnes' pep talk, Matthew felt more self-assured and landed a powerful punch on Hector's face, causing him to fall. Hector quickly got back up, but before he could retaliate, Matthew delivered a strong punch to Hector's jaw, and that was the end of the match. Even though the crowd cheered for Matthew's impressive punch, the judges declared Hector the winner because he had scored more points from his attacks. But everyone, including Harward, who had underestimated Matthew, praised him. Harward said that Matthew had the mindset of a champion and invited him to rejoin his boxing class. The movie wraps up by showing Matthew having to say goodbye to Barnes because Barnes was moving away. But before leaving, he wanted to watch Matthew fight one last time. So the moral of the story is sometimes you gotta fake your mom's signature to become a boxing superstar, but make sure you have a janitor turned boxing coach and a grandpa for backup.